Hello, I'm Carrie Ann. Welcome to another service with Pastor Ray Dieter at Grace Baptist Church.
Well, I had a flashback
Please
right
check
there.
out our website, gbcevansville.org. There, you'll find videos of our youth and children's services, daily devotions, and other ministries our church has to offer. We invite you to join us on Sunday mornings for an in-person service where we'll practice social distancing and follow safety guidelines. Now, let's hear what Pastor Ray has to say.
Faith of a young adult and the faith of a full-grown adult. And now we're going to talk about the faith of a mature Christian. Mature Christians are few and far between. And they're getting fewer. But today we're going to see a picture of how a mature Christian deals with a corrupt world around them. So in Daniel chapter 6, what we have is, if you remember from last week, we have King Belshazzar had thrown a big party, and the Medes and the Persians come in during that party and wiped them out. They took Babylon, just as God had told them they was going to do. And so that very night, King Belshazzar was killed. And Cyrus the Great appointed Darius to rule Babylon in his stead while he went on the rest of his campaign. So we have Darius, king of Babylon, a Mede. And that's where we're starting for chapter 6. So in the first verse we have, Darius decided to appoint 120 satraps, that would be like governors, over the kingdom, stationed throughout all the realm. And over them 3 administrators, including Daniel. These satraps were accountable to them, meaning the administrators, so that the king would not be defrauded. Daniel distinguished himself above all administrators and satraps because he had an extraordinary spirit. So the king had planned to set him over the whole realm. Meaning Daniel was again going to be third in command over the entire kingdom. Now, at this point, this shouldn't surprise anybody that Daniel had distinguished himself above everyone. Daniel was a strong Christian and a mature Christian. At this point, he was around 92 years old, give or take 5 years, But Daniel was old. I don't think any of us would disagree with 92 being old. My grandmother, I was telling somebody this morning that my grandmother's 91, and she does not disagree that that is old. So he is not only mature in age, but in his spirituality. Daniel was relentless in his prayer time. And he did not have the copy of the scriptures like we do, but he had read some of what he could get a hold of. Like we have in other chapters of the book, he has read the book of Jeremiah. And so books that he could get a hold of, he read and he studied. And later on in Daniel, it even says in his prayer, Lord, I know that from reading from Jeremiah, you said this. And so he was petitioning God to keep one of his promises. But Daniel did not falter in his relationship with God. He continued on, and God blessed him for it, and God made him successful in the secular world. Now, what's that going to do for Daniel? Well, yeah, he's going to be successful. He'll want for nothing. But how does the world react to the success of a Christian? Well, not very well. Let's look real quick. So, verse 4, the administrators, satraps, They kept trying to find a charge against Daniel regarding the kingdom, but they could find no charge of corruption, for he was trustworthy, and no negligence or corruption was found in him. Then these men said, "We will never find a charge against Daniel unless we find something concerning the law of his God." So they were jealous. They were jealous of Daniel. But why? Why were they jealous of Daniel? Well, Daniel had been given his spot by God. His relationship with God had made him trustworthy, had made him incorruptible. That's not something a whole lot of public servant/politicians can claim. He could not be bought. He could not be swayed. He was Daniel, servant of the Most High God, no matter where he was or what he was doing. So, these satraps and other administrators, they wanted Daniel gone, because Daniel was making them look bad. I mean, that's just it. What we can learn from this is the world is jealous of us, Christians. Why? Because we are loved by God. Now, the thing is they can be too. Those that are not Christians can easily join the ranks. I mean, we all know this. It's not an exclusive club. You don't have to pay a due. You don't have to do a work day. You don't have to keep your membership. It's easily joined and easily done. But instead, they choose to be jealous of us. Let's look real quick at 2 Thessalonians, and I'll read it for you so you don't have to turn there. But 2 Thessalonians 16:17, it says, "May our Lord Jesus Christ himself and God our Father, who has loved us and given us eternal encouragement and good hope by grace, encourage our hearts and strengthen you in every work in the world." That is a section written to the Thessalonians about holding strong, finishing the race. But it proves that God loves us above all. We are his most treasured creation. We as Christians respond to things differently than the world. We as Christians live for God. So when God decides to bless and lift someone up around us, we're happy for them. We give them a pat on the back. We say, "Man, I'm glad you got that. I'm glad you're getting to do that. That's awesome." I mean, that's normal in Christian life. When the world, when the lost have someone around them that was promoted, they see it as being promoted ahead of them. They don't like that. I've worked out in the world a lot of different capacities. And I've seen it and even felt those emotions when someone was promoted over me before I was a Christian, when I was lost. Oh, I thought, "Man, that's my job. You snaked me bad." And it created a lot of dissension between me and that coworker. And it ended up with both of us leaving. But, so I personally know what the jealousy looks like and feels like. And I know a lot of us do. But that's not the way of the Christian life. The way of Christian life is to be happy for them when God blesses someone, to uplift them yourself, to pray for them that they will use that position to further the kingdom. See, these administrators and satraps should have been praying for Daniel, saying, "He's going to be our boss." We couldn't have a better boss. I mean, Daniel's the most godly man I know. How could we have a better boss than that? They should be thanking God for that opportunity to serve under someone that's not going to ask them to kill someone, or is not going to ask them to snake somebody, or to steal money from the king, or to risk their life doing something illegal, which was prevalent in Babylon. But instead, they were jealous and they wanted that position for themselves. Galatians 5, and I forgot to mark that, so give me a second, I'll find it. But Galatians 5 talks about the characteristics of a sinful world. I'm going to read in verse 19. It says, "Now the works of the flesh are obvious: sexual immorality, moral impurity, promiscuity, idolatry, sorcery, hatred, strife, jealousy, outburst of anger, selfish ambitions, dissensions, factions, envy, drunkenness, carousing, and anything similar. I'm warning you about these things, as I warned you before, that those who practice such things will not inherit the kingdom of God." I don't think that needs explanation. So, how are we, or how will we, as mature Christians, deal with this? Well, let's go back to Daniel. Verse 10. Well, actually, I skipped ahead a little bit. I need to back up just a minute. Verse 6. "So the administrators and satraps went together to the king and said, 'May King Darius live forever.' All the administrators of the kingdom, the prefects, the satraps, the advisors, and governors, had agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an edict for 30 days. Anyone who petitions any god or man except you, the king, will be thrown into the lion's den. Therefore, your majesty, establish the edict and sign the document, so that as the law of the Medes and the Persians, it is irrevocable and cannot be changed.' So King Darius, being all fluffed up, he signed it." So, Daniel's life is now in danger for being a Christian. How does he deal with that as a mature Christian? Well, verse 10. "When Daniel learned that the document had been signed, he cried like a little girl and said, 'I'm going to die.'" No, he didn't do that. What did he do? Let's see. Maybe. He ran out in the street and hollered, "Oh, King Darius, why in the world did you do this? I'm one of your most trusted. What are you thinking, man?" No, he didn't do that either. He got mad. He got mad and plotted against these satraps, tried to get them back. No, he didn't do that either. He went and sulked in his room. No, he didn't do that. He prayed. He went straight to God. Now, why in the world would he do that? All those other ideas, we do that all the time. They sound like good ideas. No, he prayed. He let God control the situation instead of trying to fix it himself. Now, that hits me right dead center. I am a fixer. And in every way of my life, I was a mechanic. And when I wasn't a mechanic, I worked on houses for a time. I was a roofer. I worked on them. Any job I had, I ended up working on something to fix it for the company. I'm a fixer. And Carrie Ann can tell you when she just needs me to listen, I don't. I try to fix it. And I will do whatever I think I need to do to fix it. And it usually just messes everything up. But still, Daniel didn't do that. Daniel let God control it instead of him trying to control it, trying to get these guys back, or going to the king and saying, "Look, man, you've sentenced me to death. I'm going to die because you were all fluffed up for a minute." No, he didn't. He petitioned God. So, verse 10, when Daniel learned that the document had been signed, he went into his house. The windows in its upstairs room opened toward Jerusalem, and 3 times a day he got down on his knees and he gave thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Daniel changed nothing about what he did. And just a side note for you guys, this one's free. The typical position of prayer for a Hebrew is like this: standing upright, hands and face lifted up toward heaven. Daniel was on his knees. The position of prayer in Jewish life means something. Everything means something in Jewish life. Their numbers mean something. Their names mean something. The position they got in to pray meant something. Daniel was praying over his home city that was lying in ruins. He was lamenting and mourning over his people because they had turned from God and God had allowed them to reap the rewards of that. So, that one's on a side note. But Daniel prayed just like he always did. And God worked on Daniel's behalf before Daniel even knew that God needed to. Verse 14. Oh, by the way, these satraps, they were sitting up there in a building with, got their hands up like a telescope. So they didn't have a telescope. They were spying on Daniel. They knew exactly what he was going to do because Daniel was faithful. They knew exactly what he was going to do, so they just went into an adjacent building and waited and watched. So the moment Daniel prayed, these guys, they run to the king. And they tattletale. Well, they did. I mean, that's what it was. So they approached the king about his edict. Hey, king, didn't you sign this edict that for a month, 30 days, nobody is allowed to petition or pray to any god or anybody else, any man, except for you? Didn't you do that, king? Yeah, I did that. And the law of the Medes and the Persians there, king. Once you sign something, it cannot be revoked even by you. Yeah, I know that. I've been a Mede my whole life. You guys were Babylonians. I know this. They said, well, this dude Daniel, he's one of the Judean exiles, them people. He ignored you and the edict you signed, and he's still praying 3 times a day. And this is verse 14. As soon as the king heard this, he was very displeased. Was he displeased with Daniel, I wonder? No. And he set his mind on rescuing Daniel. The king knew he had been tricked. At that moment, I can just hear it in the back of my head. Oh, I messed up. Oh, I messed up. He set his mind to every effort to rescue Daniel until sundown. And he could not do it without breaking the law himself. So, God is working for Daniel. The king himself does not want Daniel in that lion's den. Daniel doesn't want Daniel in that lion's den. But God is working on Daniel's behalf, and Daniel allows God to control the situation. I'm going to repeat that a lot, because that is where we need to be. Daniel allows God to control the situation. Verse 19. No, I'm skipping. My brain is going 2 different directions here, guys. Give me 1 second. So, Verse 15. These men went together to the king. You know that this can't be changed. So the king gave the order in verse 16. And they brought Daniel and they threw him in the lion's den. Now, a lot of you are going to remember these paintings of Daniel in the lion's den that used to hang in your mama's house. And for some reason, mamas were the only ones that had them. But it's a real dark painting. And it's about like this. I mean, it ain't no little thing. And it's got Daniel down there in the bottom, and the hole is way up there, you know? And these lions are all laying around him. Well, here's what I'm thinking. I see that hole way up there, and now that I know that Daniel was 90-something, I'm 37, and I don't think I'd survive that fall. Just saying. Well, I'll be 37 and sorry, I'm going to have to take my boots off and count. 6 days. I'll be 37 in 6 days. But I don't think I can survive that fall because that hole was way up there in that painting. And he's 90-something. I mean, that's a long fall. You'd expect him to break a hip or something. But no, he's fine. They threw him in the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you continually serve, rescue you." Even the king knew it, who you continually serve. Daniel trusted that whatever happened was the will of God. How many of us can say that? I can't. My life is not a picture of whatever happens. It'll be okay. Why? Because I haven't been a Christian for the majority of my life yet. When I turn 50, I'll be half and half. If God lets me live that long. When I turn 50, I'll be half and half. So, when I look back over my life, I don't see a whatever happens, it's God's will and it'll be fine. When I look over some others, heroes in the Christian faith that I've known, I can see it in their life. I know a particular man that made an investment. He sunk about $200,000 into a company, and the one that told him to make it had been deceived as well. Investors were talked into putting in a second mortgage on a retirement home in Florida. And when that place went under, the bank got all the money, but the first mortgage and the second mortgagers just lost everything. It was his life savings, $200,000. He lost it all, and he was in his 80s. He wasn't going to make it back. And I remember him saying, "It'll be okay. It'll be okay." Boy, I was mad. I mean, I was close with this guy. I was mad. He said, "It'll be okay. Nothing to worry about. Be all right. God will take care of it." And at that time, I was like, what? Oh, man, we need to go to court. We need to fight this. We need to hire everybody we can hire. I mean, people's going to get sued. It's going to be awful. This needs to be a bloodbath. No, it'll be okay. Another hero of the faith that I've looked up to all my life was done dirty in the ministry. And people lied on him and got the cops involved. And when he was looked at, no fault could be found. But his ministry had already been destroyed and his life thrown in shambles. And he said, "It'll be okay. God will take care of it." Okay. How's that going to happen exactly? It'll be okay, son. Don't worry about it. God will take care of it. All right. So we see Daniel. These guys have lied on him. They couldn't find any fault on the law, so they had to make a law to find fault. And it was a law against God himself. But, pagan countries do that. But they made a law just to trap Daniel. It was not for anybody else. It was for Daniel. Targeted. And they got him. And I can hear Daniel say, it'll be all right. God will take care of it. It'll be all right. I kind of wonder if Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were still alive. And they come to him and say, Daniel, what you going to do, man? He said, it'll be all right. It'll be all right. Daniel let God control the situation instead of fixing it himself. So what happened? Verse 19. At first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he reached the den, he cried out in anguish to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, the king said, has your God, whom you continually serve, been able to rescue you from the lions? Then Daniel spoke, may the king live forever. My God sent an angel to shut the lions' mouths. They haven't harmed me, for I was found innocent before him. And also before you, your majesty, I have not done harm. God controlled the situation. The king was overjoyed, gave orders to take Daniel out of the lion's den. When Daniel was brought up, he was found to be unharmed, for he trusted in his God. Now, this is where the story takes a turn. This is where, I guess the only way to say this is God saved the innocent and punished the wicked. I pondered over that statement before I typed it, but I couldn't figure out another way to say it. Verse 24. Then the king gave the command that those who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and thrown into the lion's den, they, their children, and their wives. And they did not reach the bottom of the den before the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. So they didn't have to worry about the fall hurting. Then God receives the glory. King Darius wrote to every people, nation, and language who lived on the whole earth. May your prosperity abound. I issued a decree that in all my royal dominion, people must tremble before the fear of the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion has no end. He rescues and delivers. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on earth, for he has rescued Daniel from the power of the lion's den. And I will tell you that reads just like Psalms. How many times have we read in the book of Psalms, his kingdom endures forever. He has no end. Do you think Darius the Mede read the book of Psalms? Because I don't. He was just describing what he had seen God do. And so Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian, or Cyrus the Great. And that is the end of the life story of Daniel. Now the rest of this book starts back at the beginning and goes through the visions and all of the end times predictions that Daniel predicted. But we won't go into that at this point. God received the glory. We need to understand, we who are striving to be a mature Christian, we're never going to get to the point where our Christian maturity has reached its peak. Because there is no such thing as being perfect for us. So we are striving to be a mature Christian. It's our job. We're going to continually push to try to get better. But we got to understand God's will is perfect. It's number one. Number one. God's will is perfect. Now, we may not know what God's purpose is. He may not reveal it to us. He revealed it, in the book of Hosea. I was teaching that this morning in Sunday school. Hosea had the benefit of knowing what God asked him to do and why. We all won't get that every time. We have several examples in the Bible that they were told to do something and didn't necessarily know why, but they did it anyway. Job never got an explanation. And his family was killed. His servants were killed. Everything was taken from Job, except his wife. That's another topic. But he never got an explanation of why. He just knew it was God's will. So we may not always know, but God's will is perfect. Whatever happens, let God control the situation. Whatever happens, let God control the situation instead of us control the situation. Because when us control the situation, us mess up the situation. I'm an example of that. Us messed up the situation quite a bit. But when God controls the situation, it works out according to God's plan. And whatever God's plan is God's will. And whatever God's will is perfect. That we know. That we do not have to question. Why? Because this right here says so. Now, if you don't believe what the Bible says, then you don't believe none of this. And if you don't believe none of this, then the problem is not faith. The problem is salvation. Because it requires Christians to have enormous amounts of faith to do what God asks us to do sometimes. Sometimes it's easy. Sometimes it's easy. Everything God asks us to do is not crazy. Sometimes it's something we enjoy. Sometimes it's something we enjoy, but we don't know we enjoy it until we get there and do it. We end up having a blast. I went to Philadelphia on a mission trip with another church before I came here. I am not the type of person you would expect to want to work in Bible school. I was the guy that they sent to work on a house or mow a yard. Paint, construction, yard work. That was my forte at Mission Fuge. Not necessarily someone who would just be outspoken and teach kids. But God sent me to this mission trip in Philadelphia, and our one thing was to run a VBS for a church who did not have enough adults to do so. They had about, I don't know, honey, what do you think, 100-some kids? Yeah, and about 20 adults in the church. It was inner city Philadelphia. All the kids walked. And so we went and did that. Now, I didn't necessarily do what God wanted me to do. Most of the time, me and another guy were off working on a mission house, doing some demolition and preparing things because they were going to have an apartment for missionaries that were traveling through that needed to stay. You know, Philadelphia had given them the opportunity to buy row houses for $1 because they were all condemned, and they knew the church would fix them up And so the city would sell them these buildings for $1, and the church would go in and fix it up and make it into something. And so they were working on a mission house. And instead of me doing, necessarily what God told me to do, I went off doing something that was comfortable. Well, moving on later up the road, I end up here. And again, I'm not somebody necessarily that you would think about teaching kids. I had worked with the college age, not the kids. And so here, one of my duties was children, youth, and so on. And I didn't know I enjoyed that until I got to do it. Brother Gary's smiling at me. He knows. He's taught the kids for years. I didn't know I enjoyed that until I did it. I taught youth in college, but I didn't know about the little kids. I was like, man, I'm just not cut out for that. My wife, she does that. She taught little kids. She knows about buttoning the buttons and tying shoes and wiping noses. And like, man, that's just not me. But it was God's will. And God works it out. And on top of that, He changes the way we see things to fit what we need them to fit. I was never a technologically advanced individual. No. I didn't work on computers. I used them when I need them and discarded them. I didn't do any of that, ever. I barely set up my own internet at the house. And God changed my gifts to fit what Grace Baptist Church needed at that time. I questioned God a lot. Like, God, there's 5, 6, 7 churches here right around my house that need ministers. When I was in Tennessee. Youth pastors, associates, preachers. They were all empty. So why in the world am I selling my house and moving to Indiana? Well, the answer is it was God's will. I didn't question it too much. I just went. And God has worked it out for His glory, hopefully. Hopefully I don't mess it up. But it required faith for that to happen. Every time my dad went from one church to the next, me and my brother questioned it. Dad, why? Why are we moving again? Son, it's God's will. But why? It'll be okay. God will take care of it. Dad, I don't want to go to Tennessee. Son, it'll be fine. Don't worry about it. And now I know that if I hadn't went to Tennessee, I wouldn't have met Carrie Ann. Make of that what you will. It's probably worse on her than it is me. But I didn't know that then. All I knew is that I was fixing to graduate with all of my friends in Kentucky that I'd been through high school with from freshman year. And for my last year, I had to leave and go to Tennessee. That's all I knew. And I didn't like that. I didn't want that. I fought against it. I did everything I could do to get out of it. It didn't matter. I ended up in Tennessee anyway. I graduated in Tennessee from school I still to this day don't know anybody at. But it was to get me where God wanted me to, where God wanted me to be. And in that place, Tennessee, that I did not ever want to be, I never wanted to set foot in the state except to go to Dollywood. It's where I met my wife, where I got saved, where I surrendered to the ministry. And she even made me marry her in Tennessee. I got as close to Kentucky as I could. We were on the line. But God's will is perfect. And I will not say that the next thing God tells me to do, I will not argue a little. But when you look back over life and you see all these things God